good, YouTube? All right, y'all. So last time I kind of talked about the story of Abraham, and I'm gonna kind of follow up. Last time I believe it was the story of Abraham and Lot. So we're gonna fast forward a little bit until this one scene. I think people don't really talk about this too much, right? Really, they don't talk about this part where his servant Hagar. So I feel like people don't really talk about this too much, but this like really stuck out to me. So as I'm reading it, right? So as you guys, if in case you don't know, just give y'all like a follow-up story what kind of was going on. So Abraham had two sons, right? One to his servant and one to his wife, right? So he has two sons, both by different women, his wife and his servant. And one's name Isaac and the other's name is Ishmael. Yeah, Ishmael to his son. But I said Ishmael was the son of his servant, like what some would say today, hey, this a baby mama. This is this is his baby mama and the son of his baby mama. And Isaac is the son of his wife. This is his family, his home. And this is also his family, but this is his baby mama and his baby. But his baby mama, Abraham, I ain't never seen this in today's culture, but Abraham got his baby mama and his wife in the same home. So I don't know what Abraham was thinking, but it was gonna be chaos from the get-go. You can't have, it's too much friction, right? Abraham and the baby mama don't get along. Abraham, my bad. The wife, Sarah and Hagar, the Hagar's the baby mama and Sarah's the wife, Sarah don't really like Hagar that much, right? And there was times that Hagar, treat her with contempt, like before Sarah, because the baby mama, she had his first child, had his child first. And there'll be times, and that's her servant, right? That's the baby mama is her servant, so she work under her. But there'll be times that she treat her with contempt, like I'm the one I got a kid. You couldn't give me no kids. I'm the one I got pregnant. I'm the one I got a kid for him, So she'll be treated with contempt at time. And, these two women, I don't know how Abraham thought this was going to work, but, he needed to have them two separate, you know what I'm saying? But I'm glad that Abraham did it because, any fellas, they know that you can't have that in the same, they got to be a different house. You know what I'm saying? But anyway, so one day, the two boys were, playing one day. I guess they might have been playing, but Ishmael, the son of his baby mom, was messing with, making fun of, his son Isaac, the son of his wife. And his wife saw that and was like, didn't like the fact that her, this little boy was messing with her baby. Like she wasn't, like any mother would. She don't like, nobody picking with her son, but specifically not this little boy. She already don't like your mama, and I for sure don't like you for what you represent and all this, all this whole mess ghetto. You know what I'm saying? But anyway, so what kind of goes on and happens is, so Sarah sees this, right? Sarah sees him mess with him. So she goes to her husband like, She puts her foot down. She's like, no, I don't want, get rid of that slave and get rid of that little boy too. Like send them all. I don't want them around here no more. And I don't want this little boy to share the inheritance of my son, right? So when you die and all your inheritance goes on, I don't want this little boy to have any of it. I want that belongs to my son, right? And Abraham hearing this as a father, because it's like, that really upset him, right? Because this is, not only the mother of my child, but this is my child. You want me to send them off? Like, you want me to send them all, like, just cast them away like some slaves? And that really disturbed him, right? But then God appeared, right? God appeared and told him, he said, look, listen to your wife, you know what I'm saying? Like, hey, listen to your wife, your wife, I understand, but look, just how I got great inheritance, I'm going to do a great thing in your son Isaac, right? And Sarah's son, I'm going to do a great thing in Ishmael too, right? So just send them off. Just cast them off into the wilderness, right? Because I'm going to do a great thing in him. Just trust me. I got it. They're no longer in your cares. Listen to your wife. They're no longer in your cares. I got them from now on. Just cast them off, because God knew you can't have your baby mom and your wife in the same house. And then your baby mom work for your wife. Well, that wasn't going to work. So that really bothered him. And so this story goes on. So this is what I want to start off with saying, right? So, he prepares. So, he gives him a water sack, sends him like a little travel package or whatnot, and sends them off just aimlessly in the woods. Like they just deserted off in the desert, middle of nowhere, in a land called Beersheba. Like, they just out there in the wilderness, you know, with just one container of water. So what happens is the first point. So they wind up, they're out there and aimlessly out there, and they run out of water, right? And you have a mother and her child, you know, with no water. Like, they've run out of water and they're just casually walking. All right. So Hagar, the mother, Hagar is like in distraught, right? Because her child is crying, right? Because he's dying of thirst. Right? He's dying of thirst. And Hagar's like, I'm in the middle of nowhere. It's hot out here, and I have no way, no means to provide for my son. Like, I have no means to provide for my son. And I just can imagine the thoughts in her head, right? So what she does is she's like, you know what? Like, there's nothing for me to do. She's terribly distraught. She's going through it. What she does is she puts her son in a bush, and she walks 100 yards away from the bush, because she's like, she's accepted the fact, and she's crying and mourning, because she's like, my only son is dying of thirst, and there's nothing I could do about it, and I do not want to see this boy die. So I'm gonna just put him in this bush, and I'm gonna just go 100 yards away, just because I can't fathom the thought of my child dying. Like, I can't visualize this. And she's crying, right? But this is what God appears. So God heard the boy. So the God appears to her, right? God heard the boy's tears, right? And he sent the angel. God appeared, right, to Hagar in distress. And God appears to her and see her in her distress, 100 yards away from the bush, crying. She's crying, and God appeared to her and said, like, what's wrong? Like, because, like, God knew what his plans were. So he had her, like, why are you crying? What's wrong? And he tells her, he's like, look, do not be afraid. And the angel tells her, do not be afraid, because God has heard the boy crying as he lies there. All right. So my whole point is, I want to stop right there, right? So he's sitting, the boy's in the bush, and she's sitting there crying. God appears to her and says, the angel of God appears to her and said, what's wrong? Do not be afraid, because God has heard the boy's cries. And I want to stop right there, because I want to see if you realize something. Do you see how, as the boys crying, as they were in distress, in the place of the boys dying of thirst, and as they're crying and mourning in the place of distress, do you see how God immediately showed up? Like, God showed up immediately in that moment. God showed up immediately. It wasn't much later. It wasn't, it wasn't the next day, the weeks, and they were in distress long. No, they were in distress, and God showed up immediately. And I wanted to ask you, do you feel that God's responding to your tears, right? Do you feel that God's responding to your tears? Or if you're in that place of tears and sadness and dismay, do you feel like your tears are in vain, or in the fact that do you feel like your tears are in that place are you in that place alone, and that God's not there, and it's just you by yourself in your sadness, in your sorrow, right? And God's not there. And that do you think that God isn't responding to you, right? Do you feel like God's not there? Because, like I said, like, God showed up immediately for them in their distress, right? Now, he sent the angel, but in our time, and for us, right? Do you honestly feel like he's there? Because I think a lot of times we often lose sight of that, right? We often lose sight, like we're in a place of sorrow, and we think that God's not there. We think that God, like, we let our sorrow overwhelms us to the point where we think that God's not there, and he's not listening to us, right? We're just crying and crying and crying, and we're crying alone, right? And it's just us, and we're just feeling all this pain by ourselves, right? Not knowing that God is actually right there with us in that sorrow, right? Like, God hears our cries. We think that we're crying and we're just crying to nobody, and he isn't there, and that God doesn't know what we're feeling, right? So I'm going to the next verse, like right after God tells her this, right? After God shows up to her and tells her, don't be afraid, right? He tells Hagar to go to Ishmael, go to the boy, and comfort him, for I will make a great nation from his descendants. So I'm gonna paint this picture. So he tells Hagar, he said, no, look, I want you to go to that bush, because I want you to go to that bush and comfort the child, because I am gonna make a great nation throughout that child, right? God tells her plans, like great plans, as she's sitting there crying, like great plans for this child's future. And But this boy is dying right now. Like, what are you talking about? God, what are you saying about some great plans? Or what do you mean great plans? God, this boy is dying. What future? What plans? God, do you not see the plans of this? Like, do you not see what's going on? Right? And it stuck out. It was crazy to me, because you see how when God revealed to Hagar the plans for her child, right? In misery, God revealed the plans of them while they were in misery. At their lowest, God revealed great plans for their future at their lowest moment. At the moment this boy thought he was going to die, at the moment his mother thought she was going to lose her son, God revealed great plans for this boy. Does that make sense? In misery, right? As this boy is dying of thirst. And I wanted to ask you, my next point is, does the pain in the misery make you lose sight of God's great plans? Right? Because God has great plans for us, right? But does the pain of the misery that we're currently going in, our current circumstance of great pain, and the right now, does the right now make us lose sight of the great plans that God has for us, right? Or the next point is, do you think that the misery that we're currently enduring, right, the pain that we're currently enduring, are you even open to even hearing the plans that God has for you? Because I think that sometimes while we're in pain, God is speaking to us, right? God may be telling us things for our, like, plans for our future and things to get us out of it, like that there is hope. God is telling us that there is hope, but He's telling us in a place of misery, and it just doesn't seem like likely. Like, it doesn't seem like, imagine, like, you can't even fathom that. Like what? Like, do you not see what I'm currently going through? Like Hagar said, my boy is dying right now. My child is dying. What do you mean he has a great future? My child is dying. What future? And in the place of your misery, is if God is telling you something of your plans, if God is comforting you and giving you hope, has your circumstances not allowed you to fathom what He's saying? Like, has your circumstances allowed you to lose sight of the plans and the hope that God has for you, right? That there's gonna be all right. Like, that, you see what I'm saying? And my next point, so what God did is, so as she's crying, right, God told her this, right? God, as she's still sitting there crying, and God had just told her that of these plans. She's sitting there, and then God opened her eyes. God opened her eyes. And there was, right there was a well of water sitting right there for Hagar. There was a well of water. She's sitting there crying in distress after God had told her these plans, and after she's thinking her boy's about to die, God had opened her eyes. And there was, right there was a well of water waiting for her. And she filled that water up, took her son. And they went on to live, and then they actually lived in the wilderness, and God was with that son. God was with that boy, and he became like a sharpsman. And God was right. That boy became a sharp, like some type of sharpsman. An archer? Yeah, he became an archer, and he learned in the woods, right? With no father or nothing, but God was his father, and God provided for him the rest of his childhood into manhood, out there in the wilderness with him and his mom. Could you imagine that? God provided for him with just this boy and his mom, and God was his father in the wilderness. But I'm gonna backtrack a little bit, because to that moment where God opened up her eyes, right? And you see how God made a way out of no way, right? Like, she's sitting there, just moments ago, she was under the impression that her little child was gonna die of thirst, right? And then God opened her eyes, and God made a way, had a well of water, fresh water waiting right there for her, right? Like, God knew all along this little boy wasn't gonna die, because God had plans for this child. So that's when God asked her, when he first appeared, the angel first appeared, she's like, what's wrong? Like, what? Why are you crying? Like, God, I got great plans for this child. You think I'm gonna let him die out here? I'm the one that told him to go out here. You think I'm gonna like, I allowed all this to happen. God, I allowed all this to happen. You think I'm gonna let this child die out here? No. So what's wrong? Like, you think just because it looked unlikely right now that you think just because it looked unlikely right now that my plans won't prevail? No, I am with you. And in that moment, I want to ask you guys, in that moment when her eyes were closed, right? God opened her eyes for a way out. Have you allowed God to open your eyes to show you the way out of your circumstances, right? right? Because what our pain and our sorrow does, we close our eyes and we are blinded, and our vision so foggy with the things that we're going through, right? Whatever it is, it's so blinded by the things that we're going through, right? We aren't allowing God to open up our eyes and see that there's a way of hope sitting right there wait for us, right? There is hope for us in our circumstances, right? But we have allowed ourselves in the pain and sorrow, and then we allow that voice and enemy telling us, the enemy's telling us like, look, it's over with, there's no way, it won't get no better than this, that's just my life, and that's how things are. Right? And we aren't allowing, we're listening so much to that, we aren't allowing God to open up our eyes and see that there's hope right in front of us. Man, that was a lot to unpack, man. I love y'all and I appreciate y'all. I'm signing out. Peace.